So I suggest we start. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar today on the possibilities for reducing the error rate in reporting personnel costs in Horizon 2020 grants. My name is Peter Hertwig. I am a head of unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. I am here today with colleagues from my unit, but also from the legal unit and from the audit unit. The purpose of today's webinar is really to go through the details on how to report the personnel costs in order to allow you to avoid any potential errors. According to our records, the persons and you invited today to this meeting are in one way or another involved in running a grant, a project under Horizon 2020. And that is the reason why we invited you with dedicated invitations. Why do we do this? We know that having errors in the cost claims for our grants can have dire consequences. And we also see that the highest contribution to the error rate comes from the personnel costs. If you make errors and the auditors come and they spot these errors, what can happen is that we will send you claims for recovery. So you will have to pay back part of the grant that you received. And there is also a lot of administrative burden linked to all these processes. So the best is to avoid making errors in the first instance. And this is the purpose of today's meeting. We should also mention that it's not only painful for you and for us if such errors happen, it's also a question of the reputation of the whole research and innovation funding program. Because if the budget authority, meaning the European Parliament, or even in the last instance, the European taxpayer, sees that a lot of this money supposed to be spent on research and innovation is spent with errors, then we have a problem in assuring future budgets for future research and innovation activities. So this in terms of introduction and motivation why we do this today. We will have two relatively short presentations. The first one will be given by my colleague David Mejuto from the legal unit on the rules for reporting personnel costs. And the second will be given by Sarvan Sorin from the audit unit, who tells us about the experience of the auditors with actual errors that they have spotted and with tips and tricks how to avoid such errors. And then we will also have possibilities for questions and answers. The communication channel for the questions and answers will be Slido. So you find the coordinates for accessing Slido on the event webpage. We also put them again into the chat maybe. So Olivier, if you can put a chat contribution again so that everybody has access to Slido. We see that some people already spotted it, and we have already a few questions there. What we would ask you is that before you put in a question, you look at the questions that are already there. And if you see that your question or a very similar question is already there, you vote on the question so that it gets a higher number of votes. And we will then at the end go through all the questions in the order of number of votes. So we cannot promise that we can come to the end and reply to all questions, but we will certainly reply the most popular questions at the end. And before we actually start, we prepared two very quick polls. These are there just to give us an impression on who is actually there behind the screens and who follows us in this webinar. So I would ask you now to go to the Slido page. And so either you go to our event webpage and do it directly there, or you go to Slido, www.slido.do, and the event code is costs 2020. And I see that quite a few of you have already started doing this. And the first question is, of course, related to from which organization you come. I see the figures are increasing. Thank you very much for contributing. I wait a few more seconds. Olivier, maybe you put also again into the chat the Slido link directly and the code for our meeting. I see it is also now on the screen on the left-hand side. Good. Okay, I think the figures are stabilizing. So we see that indeed a third among the audience are people employed in an SME, and 7% own even the SME, and the other half, or more than a half, come from bigger organizations. So thank you very much for this, and we continue immediately with the second poll. Olivier, can you put it on? So we want to know whether you are alone in this project or whether you are in a collaborative project. Okay. I think the figures are very clear. 90% of you are in collaborative grants and about 10% in mono-beneficiary grants. That is a typical figure. Thank you very much. I think we can now finish these two polls, and I would then hand over directly to my colleague David Mejuto for the first presentation. But I will also invite you, you can at any moment put in questions in Slido in the Q&A section and vote on the question of others. So over to David, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you hear me all. I'm going to try to share the screen first of all to know that we are in the right scenario. Let's see if it works. Going to the beginning. Okay. And normally everything should be okay there. Hopefully so. Can you confirm, Peter?
There is still one dark rectangle, lower right corner. Yes, there.
Okay. Hopla! I think that's the best I can do for the time in previous. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the sunny Belgium. We were speaking about the errors, and before we go into this short presentation, because as Peter explained it, really the objective today is not to spend too much time on getting information that you may have already be aware of, or that you already know, and I'm sure that you will have questions, and it always happens in these webinars that we don't have enough time for all the questions, so we try to concentrate in the most important messages during the slides, so it's not going to be too long. But I thought it was very interesting when Peter was speaking about the errors and the consequences of errors. And of course, there are errors on personal costs, there are errors in indirect costs, not so many now because they depend on the direct costs, there are errors in subcontracting. But for me, the biggest error of all is the perception of some beneficiaries that when you get a grant from Horizon 2020, you won the lottery. It doesn't go that way. You cannot just get the grant and go to the Bahamas. Well, now with the COVID, you can go nowhere, not even to the right corner. But even in absolute terms, this is not an unconditional grant. There is a lot of conditions for you to get that money. And I would say, and I have discussed it with many entities over the years, and I'm convinced that Horizon 2020 is one of the most generous funding schemes around the world for research. But it's not unconditional, I insist. There is a lot of obligations on your side. And the first, and the one that will take our time today, is that for getting the money, you will have to declare only eligible costs. So the message that you normally get, which is correct, that in most cases you will get 100% of EU funding, it means 100% of the eligible costs. So 100% of all those costs that comply with all the conditions that we are going to tell you today for personal costs, and there are other conditions for subcontracting, and there are other conditions for purchase of services or for consumables, etc., etc. So it's not just, and don't get with the idea of neither I get the grant, I can do whatever I want. That's wrong. Don't get with the idea that, okay, I get the grant, I spend the money, and then I will recover 100%. That's not completely right either. Remain and keep in your mind that you will get the grant, and you will in most cases get up to 100% of the cost, but only of those costs that comply with the eligibility conditions. So you really need to know what are the eligibility conditions. You really need to respect them when declaring the cost. So today we're going to speak, and we are going to concentrate on the eligibility conditions for personal costs. And that's what we are going to start explaining now. So first thing, we have several framework programs, and occasionally, like it's going to be probably in this year and the immediate years to come, they overlap with each other. So probably now there are not that many FP7 projects. I am pretty sure that you don't have any one of those, but we are soon starting with the Horizon Europe grants. So over 2021, 2022, 2023, etc., you will have or possibly have Horizon 2020 grants living while you perhaps are applying or implementing also Horizon Europe grants. The message is each framework program has its own rules. So everything that we are going to explain you today on personal costs for Horizon 2020 not necessarily applies to Horizon Europe. A lot of things are the same, but not all are the same. And also the other way around. So you will have some simplifications, if you want, into the Horizon 2020 grants that, whether you like it or not, do not apply to Horizon 2020. The rules are different. The grant agreement that you will sign is also different. So each program is its own rules. And even within each framework program, there are different types of grants that may have different rules. I just put you there three very illustrative examples that we say. In Horizon 2020, a bulk of the grants are done under cost reimbursement, and those are the explanations on which we are going to concentrate today. So the eligible cost, the cost actually incurred, and how we fund those costs. But there are also lump sum grants, which is a fixed amount for delivery of the work. And there are also, probably many of you know about those, Marius Lodos category grants, which work only on the basis of unit costs. In those cases, those are person months. You see, so there are slightly different also cost eligibility conditions depending on the type of grant. We are going to concentrate today, bear in mind, Horizon 2020 cost reimbursement grants. And those are the rules that we are going to explain now. So we are going to speak about personal costs. You have seen that most of the errors are concentrated in personal costs. In the past, we also had a lot of errors in indirect costs, but now with the flat rate, those have disappeared. So when you have errors in indirect costs, it's because you had errors in other direct costs like personnel or subcontracting, sorry, or purchase of services. So today in Horizon 2020, as I say, the bulk of the errors are concentrated in personal costs. So what are your personal costs? Well, the first and most evident is the cost that you incur for your employees. So I'm the employer, my employees, the salaries, those are going to be part of the personal costs. You may also declare as your personal cost seconded staff. This is typically the case of universities, where professors are seconded from one university to another. There are other cases, even in private sector, there are cases of seconded staff. They are not so usual, but they exist also. So seconded staff may also be declared as part of your personal costs. Then we have the specific case of the owners of participants that are small or medium-sized enterprises and who work in the project. We will have a small piece of information later on this particular case. So these are also personal costs. And finally, the tricky case, I would say, is the cost of other persons who work for you as beneficiary, but not as employees, but under other type of contracts, typically service contracts, and that's most likely that's what you will qualify as consultants. In some cases, they can also be declared as your personal cost. We'll have another word on that later on. And what you have seen now is simply the way in which Horizon 2020 allows you to declare personal cost. I know it looks awfully complex, but the fact in reality is that the difficulty is to find your way through these three of options. We try to, in Horizon 2020, be precise, but be also as flexible as possible to accommodate all the different practices of beneficiaries. And this is not just the practice in your own country. They are not even the practice in Europe as a whole. That's why we were starting the conference, I saw there a message where somebody from Lebanon was greeting us. So this is all around the world. So we try to offer options, as many as possible, so that every beneficiary could find the possibility the closest to their normal practices. You see, the result, of course, is this branch, which a lot of this tree with a lot of different branches, in which it's not always evident to find your way. You see there marketing in light blue what is our recommended path, and we will see in the next steps how this recommended path works. It doesn't mean I insist that there are no others. There are others, and perhaps even some of these other paths are slightly financially more interesting for you, but they are also much more risky. So when deciding what option you are going to do, what you are going to take, you need to bear in mind, well, not just if I get 5, 10, or 100 or 1,000 euros more, but also what are the consequences in terms of risk. Because remember that the audits may come in 2 years' time, they might be implemented in 3, 4 years' time, and by that moment, the money is already gone, and you will have to pay back if you declared costs that are not eligible. So it's a very complex situation at the moment that you better avoid now. One suggestion, avoid it by not taking risky paths. So in a nutshell, how the calculation works in Horizon 2020? Well, the essential is very simple. You multiply the number of hours worked by each person in the action, supported by time records. I will insist several times on that. Horizon 2020, you need time records. This amount of hours, you multiply by an hourly rate. And the hourly rate is defined by a formula that comes in the grant agreement. So it's not generally speaking up to you. It's not something that you have to invent. The grant agreement tells you how you must calculate the hourly rates. So hours worked multiplied by an hourly rate. Hours worked. I insist, you need time records, you need timesheets. That's an obligation in Horizon 2020. There is an exception for persons worked exclusively in the action. But even so, that's for very specific cases in which the person really did nothing else than working in the action. And still, it's very easy to fill in time records for those people, and you will simplify your own life if you apply the time records for everyone, so you don't have to make difference on how to tackle the time of one person compared with another. The option is there also. So I insist, you need time records. You cannot declare budgeted time. So it's not that because in the project proposal, even in Annex 1, I say that the project will take me 12 person months, that you can declare 12 person months. Budget is budget, it's an estimation. At the moment of reporting, you declare the reality in accordance with your time records. So no budgeted time, no estimated time. It's not at the end of the year, I think, okay, more or less I worked 6 months, let's put it 1,000 hours. It's not possible either. You do that, you probably will see the auditors rejecting the full amount of the hours declared. So don't take that path either. And the same goes for time allocation, speaking about a percentage of the time. So it's relatively often that we see in employment contracts saying, and the person will dedicate 20% of her time or his time to project X. Doesn't matter. That's the matter. What is in the contract written is potentially as what is in the budget. It's an estimation. At the end, for declaring cost Horizon 2020, you need to justify with these time records the number of hours that the person working in the action. Horizon Europe will be different, but you will, while implementing Horizon 2020, you must keep these time records and you must declare the reality. It's in your own interest. Be assured about that. So we have our hours working in the action. Now we have on the other side the hourly rate. Multiply the hours by the number of hours by the hourly rate. What do you put in this hourly rate? For the personal cost that you will divide by the productive hours. To calculate the hourly rate, personal cost divided by productive hours. The personal cost, the real salary of the person, the social security contributions, the taxes, and other costs that are included in the remuneration that arise from national law of the employment contract. There are some tricky issues about bonuses.
Hello, colleagues. Can someone still hear me?
Yes, but it seems
I
that
cannot hear
David is cut.
anymore.
Yeah.
So let's hope he comes back quickly.
He's gone. Maybe Isabel can take over.
Yes, I will try to take over. Just have to.
Yeah,
David is
Isabel,
back.
I'm back.
He's
Okay.
back. Very good. Sorry for this.
Let's see if it lasts. Are you still seeing my presentation or not?
No.
No, okay. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna try. Okay, it's looking better now. I don't have the possibility. You need to upgrade me as panelist.
Oh yes. Okay. One second, please.
Don't worry.
No, you're again co-host. You should be able to share.
Let's see if in a few seconds it comes. Now, okay. We need to have some background music for these events, these situations like that. Okay, now it should work. Yes?
It does.
All right. Let's hope it still stands up to the end. I'm sorry, this is beyond our control. We are not even at the commission premises, that we are working from home, and home is not always the best place for internet connections. So let's go ahead. So we were speaking about the three options for the productive hours. The first is what I was saying. I hope you heard it still while I was speaking. The first option is 1720 annual hours, and this is the option that we recommend simply because it's the more secure and it's the simplest. So the risk of error is nearly inexistent if you take this option. It means that the number of hours that you will use to calculate the hourly rate is 1720. And that's it. It doesn't change regardless if the person actually works more or works less. It's 1720. You will do a prorata of this 1720 if the person works part-time. If I'm an employee 50% part-time, for example, or if I started working in July, for instance, just 6 months, then instead of 1720, I will use the prorata corresponding to 6 months. The only cases in which you will change this 1720. There's another exception for parental leave that we might treat a bit later. And then you have two other options that are individual annual productive hours. That means that for each individual person, you calculate the number of productive hours of that person to calculate his or her individual hourly rates. It implies a relatively heavy administrative burden. Or for those of you who have analytical accounts and already an usual cost accounting practice, you can also use the standard annual productive hours, which are those that you normally use for your analytical cost accounting. So if you don't have analytical cost accounting, you simply forget about this option. Provided that it's at least 90% of the time that the person normally works. I know it looks complex. That's why I insist. If you have doubts, if you don't want to take the risk, 1720 is fine. Anybody can use it, and it gives you the security in the calculations. So now we know we have the number of hours worked, we have the hourly rate, but how many times do I have to calculate an hourly rate? There are, again, two separate possibilities. The first, the biggest, the one that we put there into a frame, is what we recommend, again, because it's the less administrative burden required, and is probably by far the more secure of the two options. This is to calculate an annual hourly rate. So once per year, per person, you calculate an hourly rate by dividing the annual personal cost of that person by the annual productive hours of that person. And that you will apply for all the hours that the person worked during that year. Okay? Let's imagine that your financial year is January to December 2020, for example. You will calculate an hourly rate dividing the personal cost of the person in 2020 by the annual productive hours in 2020. In our previous example, let's imagine 1720. It's as simple as that. You will reduce the thing next year in 2021 to calculate a new hourly rate. The tricky issue, and the reason why we have another option, is that in the annual hourly rates, you can only calculate the hourly rate with full financial years. So you need to have the financial year completed in order to be able to calculate an hourly rate. For example, today I could not calculate an hourly rate for financial year 2021, because if my financial year equals calendar year, my financial year 2021 is still ongoing. So I don't have the information to calculate the hourly rate. For those cases, so if I have to declare hours for my working time today for 2021, I will have to use the same hourly rate that I calculate for year 2020. That's what we call the last financial year, okay? What is the practical impact? In itself is simple and it avoids calculations, but the practical impact is that if my salary is raised today, for instance, and I have to declare personal costs in June, my salary increase will not be reflected in the hourly rate from January till June, because I still have to use the hourly rate of the last closed financial year. You see, it's only at the end of 2021 that my salary increase will be reflected in the hourly rates for Horizon 2020 grants. Okay, you don't want to use the hourly rate, for example, because your salary is increased exponentially every year, and you want from the first day that the salary is increased to be reflected in the hourly rates. You have the second option, which is to calculate the hourly rates per month. Per month obviously implies that rather than one hourly rate per year, you will have 12 hourly rates in each year. So you will have to review the calculations 12 times by dividing the monthly personal cost by the monthly productive hours. And there are some specific conditions for the use of the monthly hourly rates, but we will not get into details in this very short presentation. I insist, we recommend the annual rate because it's simple and more secure, but you have another option if you prefer, which is the monthly calculations. Two general limitations, if you want. You can never charge in 1 year more hours to all EU and Euroton grants together than the number of hours that you used it to calculate the hourly rates. So the number of annual productive hours. The reason is simple, is because remember that the grant contributes to your costs. If I divide the annual personal cost by 1720 and I multiply again by 1720, I'm already charging the full salary of the person to the EU grants. If instead of multiply by 1720, I multiply by 1800, for instance, I automatically making a profit because I'm charging more to the EU grants than the total salary of the person. So that's one of the limitations. And related or derived to this from this one, you can never declare more personal costs for you or Euratom grants in a year altogether than the actual personal cost of that person in your accounts. Again, it's the same logic. You can never make profit. The EU grant can only contribute to the cost actually incurred. Calculations may be complex, it's clear, and we have seen in more than one case that not everybody is aware or remembers or verifies at the time of reporting that the calculations are rightly done, and that this, for instance, these two threshold, this double ceiling that I have just explained, is respected. So we, in order to help you with all these different conditions, we have created a wizard for personal costs, which helps you with the calculations and the verifications. Of course, if you enter incorrect data, you will get incorrect results. But if you get into it the right data, the wizard will ensure that your cost declaration is correct, your calculations are right, and the ceilings are respected. So you can get access to the wizard through the reporting module. You are looking at there where the entry point is, there in Sigma. Is this magic wand that you see under actions at the time in which you are reporting your costs. So we are getting to the end of this part of the presentation, just 2, 3, 4 slides, because I wanted to tackle very quickly some specific cases. One of these cases is, as this little person in the slide is saying, I want to pay to my employees more than their normal salary for the work in this prestigious grant. This is something that happens. In some countries, it's extremely unusual. In some other countries, it's really the normal day-to-day way of working. So the message from our side is, well, if you just do this for EU grants, for European Union grants, we cannot accept it. One key message is whatever happens just for EU grants, unless it's the EU grant imposing it, but whatever you do for EU grants only is not acceptable. But what if I always pay this extra salary, this increased salary in all prestigious grants, for example? Well, that is a different case. That's what we call project-based remuneration, the situation in which the salary increases when the person participates in grants. And there are quite a number of specific rules about these cases. And I must say that if somebody can be called complex in the personal cost calculation, is this dimension of project-based remuneration. We don't have now the time, neither the possibility to get into the details of the project-based remuneration. If you feel that that might be your case, if you feel that, yes, indeed, when our people work in specific projects, we normally pay them more, please check carefully the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement. We will give the link at the very end in a couple of slides, because you need to do some extra calculations to verify what you can declare as personal cost beyond all that I have already explained it up to here. Two other particular cases, if you want, the one of the SME owners. So if I am the owner of an SME who participates in the Horizon 2020 grant, and I'm personally the SME owner, I'm working in the action, well, if I'm an employee, I will calculate, if I'm an employee of the company, of the SME, I will calculate my personal costs as for any other employee. That's no problem. Then the fact that I'm owner or co-owner of the SME doesn't make a difference. But if I am not an employee and I don't have a salary which results from an employment contract, then I must use the SME owner unit cost. It's a fixed amount per hour. So the hourly rate is already given in the grant agreement. It comes explicitly into Annex 2A of your grant agreement. Important message, employment contracts, salary employment contract. If I have as SME owner, I have whatever other type of relation with my company, if I'm paid through dividends, or if I have a consultancy contract, or the type of service contract, I had a contract that is not an employment contract, you must use the SME owner unit cost. Okay, the only exception is if I have an employment contract with SME. That's one. And the other specific case we tackle very quickly and very quickly also now is that of consultants. Not all your consultants can be declared as personal costs. In many cases, or in some cases, you will have to declare them either as purchase of services or as subcontracting. Please, if you have consultants working for you and you want to charge their work to the Horizon 2020 action, check carefully the text of Article 6282 of your grant agreement and the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement, because there are some specific conditions for you to be able to declare their costs as personal costs. And this is my final slide. There is a lot of information available. Luckily, somehow, it is concentrated in, I would say, two main and big documents. The one I already named a couple of times is the Horizon 2020 Annotated Grant Agreement. It makes 849 pages. You don't need to read them all. 849 pages accounts for all the different types of grants that we have in Horizon 2020. So you just need to know about what is your specific grant. And there you will have all the explanations, all the examples that can guide you through the interpretation of the legal provisions of the articles of your grant agreement. It's the same document that we use, so there is no hidden agenda there. When I will be replying to your questions later on, I will be using also the annotated grant agreement. The other key document is the Horizon 2020 online manual, which really helps you, particularly for all the procedures and steps on your implementation of the grant agreement, the living through the grant agreement. And if after reading that you still have questions, you have very good resources available to help you. The first is your national contact points. You have there the hyperlink to the list of national contact points. These are people in your country speaking your language, knowing your particularities, which can help you because they are experts in different areas of Horizon 2020. And on top, you can also contact us directly, the Commission, so me and my colleagues, if it concerns the legal provisions of the grant agreement, via the Research Inquiry Service. There you send a question directly to the Commission, as I said, and we reply to you in writing. And I think that I stop there. So we have time later on for questions and answers, and I pass the floor, I don't know if to Peter or to Sorin directly. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, David. I will quickly take the floor again. And thank you for the very brief and to the point presentation. We have two quick Slido poll questions following your presentation. So Olivier, could you bring up the first or the third poll question? And then I would ask all the participants to go again to Slido and reply to the poll. So the question is, when declaring personnel costs, after what you heard now and after what you learned already before, do you find the rules clear, a bit complex, very complex, or you don't know at all? And thank you very much. The figures are already increasing. Okay, thank you. I think the figures stabilize. We see that around a fifth of you even think that the rules are clear. And of course, the vast majority sees that they are a bit complex. And I think we would not deny this, but it's in the nature of things. Okay, thank you very much. And then we have another one, quick poll question on the so-called personnel cost wizard. And we just want to know whether you have heard anything about it, and if yes, whether you find it useful. Okay, again, very clear result, and this confirms also our impression on the actual use of this wizard. We see that not many of our beneficiaries are yet using it, maybe because they are not aware of it. But at least some of you who have used it find it at least partially helpful. And I think following this result, we will maybe in the question and answer session come back also to this wizard and maybe also point you to a detailed guide that is available on our portal for you if you indeed want to use this wizard. So thank you very much. I think we can close this poll, and I would now give the floor to our auditor colleague, Servan Surin, who will give you some indications on the errors that are already actually found in audits and some tips on how you can hopefully avoid them in the first place. Surin, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll try to share my presentation. I hope you can see it. So presentation is about,
perfect.
Okay, thank you. Presentation is about how to avoid errors in declaring personal cost in Horizon 2020 grants. Of course, we will maybe repeat some of the very nice explanations done by my colleague David, but you know, repetition is the mother of learning. So let's try to go through. First of all, without any link to the rules as such, but why the errors do they occur when we do audits? So first of all, obviously because of some misunderstanding of the rules. But could be also because of lack of attention to the detail of the provisions of the grant agreement. So that's nothing surprising as such. The consequences of errors for beneficiaries could be the non-optimal use of funding available or recoveries that could be sent also to recover some of the funds paid wrongly. And for the European Commission, obviously, scrutiny of the budgetary authority and the European Court of Auditors increased error rate for the program, and increased ex post audit efforts as well, in order to try to cover and to reduce this error rate, and some corrective measures that may be applied as well. So obviously, no error would be best for all of us. Quickly to tell you, just for you to have an idea about how the error rate is calculated. So from the whole population of grants, there is a sample which is drawn and which will be audited. And based on the results of the audit findings of this sample, there will be an error rate calculation by dividing the sum of the negative adjustments to the sum of the audited amounts. So this is just for you to have an idea of where we are going, in fact, what is the result, what is the purpose of all this. So to give assurance elements by assessing the legality and regularity of Horizon 2020 project payments, and to calculate also what we call a residual error rate, and to have it, of course, at an acceptable level. The general control objective of the overall control strategy is to get the residual error rate as close as possible to 2%, without necessarily expecting it to get under 2%. So this is the overall picture of the control strategy. As my colleague said already, and to emphasize a little bit better, the personal cost, the error detected in personal cost, the main error detected in personal cost, because there are more, but the main errors are due to incorrect productive hours calculation, due to incorrect, so the productive hours calculation would be the down part. I will explain it later on in another slide. The remuneration cost, estimated cost, for example, incorrect time working on the action claim, and other elements like unreliable or missing timesheets. So these are the main errors that we find in audits. You know, the audits are coming after the financial statements are paid, and we are trying to use the same rules as were explained by my colleague earlier, and try to ensure compliance with those rules. And that's why sometimes we find errors. Now, overall, the personnel costs are calculated, as already explained, but maybe to emphasize it from another point of view also, by multiplying the number of hours worked with the so-called hourly rate, which is the total personnel cost divided by total productive hours. The total personnel costs are composed, of course, of the basic salary, of the social security contributions, and eventually some add-ons. Productive hours could be calculated, as already explained as well, by using options 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the preferred one because it's the most simple to use. The option of using 1,720 hours. Now, some tips, some suggestions, some advices from our side. You should make sure that your time recording is consistent with the human resources records, meaning basically that if a person is absent, there are no hours registered for the action, for example, or in sick leave and so on. So really to ensure consistency of the timesheets with the human resources records, to properly date and sign the timesheets, and not to have in excess of your full-time employment. My colleague David explained the so-called double ceiling, so not to have more hours spent on new projects than the equivalent of full-time, meaning the number of productive hours, and to have sufficient in terms of information compared to the requirements of Article 18 of the time recording. So the minimum requirements should be there in order to ensure proper reliability of the time recording system. Now, the numerator, I was saying the upper part of the equation to calculate the hourly rate. The errors or the advices that we can give for this part, for it to be correctly calculated. So the eligible personnel cost should include the salaries, the social security contributions, employers and employees, both. So employees' social security is already included in the brute salary, so it shouldn't be added again. And the taxes and other costs included in the enumeration if they arise from national law or the employment contract. Here, carefully read the details of the rules, because there are some specifications, so it's not very straightforward. So please read carefully the rules. Also to say that the eligible personnel costs do not include any ineligible items, so those that are enumerated in Article 6.5 of the grant agreement. We're not going to the details, but you will find them there. And any cost included in other budget cost categories, like for example, indirect cost or travel, daily allowances, and so on. So yeah, obviously it's not to claim the same cost twice. As I was saying, one of the main error that we find in audits is linked to annual productive hours. The advice obviously is to use, again, 1,720 hours, especially if the employment contract does not specify the time conditions or if the annual workable hours cannot be determined. Yeah, so the notion of annual workable hours is explained in the grant agreement, in the annotated grant agreement, but obviously this is the most safe option from an audit point of view. We also see it in audits. As soon as we have option 1, it goes smoother. It's the calculations. There are obviously less errors found in productive hours, and the calculations and hence less discussions about productive hours. So the down part of the calculation of the equation of the hourly rate. So some further small suggestions and hints on how to avoid errors. You should make sure that your time charge to the project is correct. So the number of hours that you will use to multiply with the hourly rate calculated will be really coming from the timesheets, which are reliable and correct. So the time is really equal to the timesheets. The time used for the calculation of personal cost is the same as in the timesheets. The time records meet the grant agreement's conditions. There are 6 conditions that should be fulfilled, and they meet them. If they don't, then things are going a bit complicating from an auditing point of view, because we have to assess eventually the reliability of the time recording system. So this is an important element as well. And the remuneration in the numerators of the upper part is correct, meaning is calculated from basic salary, social security contributions, and so on. And obviously the productive hours in the denominator are correct. Preference to use option 1, which is the easiest option to use. Or if you use the other 2 options, then please carefully read this nice table and clarification given for each of the options, when you can use them, and pay attention to the details. For example, option 2 cannot be used with monthly and so on. I will not enter into the details. That's not the purpose of the webinar at this stage, at least. Some other further hints. Personal cost formula reconciles, yeah, meaning that the calculations are correct, and reconciles also with the breakdown information that you have in your accounts, in project accounts, project cost accounting, if any, or in the accounts as such for each person. The transaction listing reconciles. So here we're talking about the extract of cost that you make from your accounting in order to claim the cost in the Horizon 2020 action. So the cost that you extract should reconcile with the financial statement that you are claiming to in the participant portal. So you should really double check this before sending the financial statements, because we can see we find several errors due to typos or to errors from transferring this data into the participant portal. The employment contracts are in place. Of course, they normally are in place without waiting for Horizon 2020 action. But yeah, it's just a kind reminder. And the final test is performed before you press the button, obviously, to send your financial statement to the participant portal. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much. And looking forward for to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sorin. And this means we can already start now with our question and answer session. We see that you have already put quite a number of questions into the Slido, and we would encourage you to continue with this following the 2 presentations. But in the first instance, you are invited to vote on the questions that are already there, because we will now start going through them in the order of number of likes. So Olivier, can you bring up the questions and answers in the order of likes? Yes. Okay. We start with the first one. Highest voted timesheets. We run an IT-based time reporting system on SAP with safe access for employees. Are such electronic reports without signature sufficient? David, do you want to explain what the rules behind this are?
I will leave this to Sorin, not because I don't know about
okay.
it, because it's one of these typical things that they verify during
Okay,
the audit,
sorry.
and SAP is
Yes.
one of their favorite IT systems.
Okay, Sorin, so please.
Thank you. So this is typical. I mean, we see during audits many IT time recording system. We see that this kind of IT time recording system are also linked with the normal project accounting or general accounting IT system, and obviously that would be the best scenario that you may have. However, there are some conditions in the grant agreement linked to electronic signatures. Is that you have that these signatures, the sending of these timesheets can be done only by the user, there is only one access per each user, which is secure. And then this is also validated electronically as well by their supervisor. So provided that there are three conditions, I don't have them all of them in mind now, but especially for electronic time recording system in Article 18, there are three conditions that should be respected. And if this is okay, and normally these are respected with IT systems such as SAP or similar. So yes, the answer is yes, provided everything is properly done.
If I may, because
Yes.
indeed I was recalling now the typical case about the electronic people saying we have electronic time recording system. What they do is to type into Excel the number of hours, and nobody signs, nobody verifies, nobody nothing. Of course, that might be electronic, but it's not something that is not. It's not an electronic time recording system. When you have an electronic time recording system, you normally have at least a username and a password, and the IT system keep trace of the changes and who signed the change. This is the kind of verifications and minimum conditions that are required. And as Sorin said, well, SAP typically has this fulfills these conditions with the reservation of how do you use it, because one thing is what the system can do, another thing is what you do with the system. So just to complement that, not everything that goes into a computer is an electronic system. That was my message.
To be 100% precise, maybe David, can you bring up the respective part in the annotated grant agreement so that we point the participants directly to the rules that are available, and you can read them afterwards in detail.
What we can do, because if indeed Emmanuel Olivier let me share again my screen, because I had the screen prepared for the next question with the AGA, so I will tackle the two questions now through the AGA, the one we are dealing with and the next one.
Very good, thank you.
So I'm right now waiting to get the access to share my screen. It takes always a few seconds. I hope it doesn't take a few minutes, just a few seconds.
For the first question, so the conditions are in page 179 of the AGA.
Good. Okay. So because I already had it with me ready, are you seeing the AGA right now? Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm tackling the question that you have after first, because I had already spotted the paragraph in the annotated grant agreement, and I will come back to this page 79 of on the electronic time recording system later on. So the question that we have immediately after referred to the people who is hired during the ongoing financial year, so they don't have information from the last closed financial year that they can use to calculate the hourly rate. And this is what I wanted to show you when I was speaking about the annotated grant agreement. Everything that we say is there. We have the general explanations, and then after those, we have the specific cases. And for instance, this case of employees hired during the ongoing financial year is a specific case. And if you go to the annotated grant agreement, that I will show you the first page later on, you go to the annotated grant agreement and you see there that indeed this case is already foreseen. We have already encountered, of course, we are now in 7 years of implementation of Horizon 2020, and nearly everything that you can face now has already happened to someone else before. So for the case of the employees hired during the ongoing financial year, we explicitly say that this is an exception, because of course there's nothing from the last closed financial year related to them. In those cases, the hourly rate can only be calculated on the basis of the personal costs incurred during the ongoing financial year. So it's already an exception. And in the annotated grant agreement, we tell you it is an exception. There is an exceptional rule for it. You have an example on what would be the situation. And you have even some warnings regarding how be careful for the calculation of the pro rata of the I have a strange message here. Calculation of the pro rata of the annual productive hours. So here you have the answer, but the most important for me is that there you are able to see that indeed most of the things that you will come across during the implementation of your grant agreement related to the articles of the grant agreement, you will find the answer and you will find examples in the annotated model grant agreement. And then just to show you how it looks like, the first page, so you know what we are talking about. The annotated model grant agreement is the link that we had in the last slide. It's of course also the link in the section of documents in the portal. You see that it has 846 pages, but I insist all the grants agreements are there, explained. And then let's try if we can go. Sorry, you say it's 179, right?
Yes.
So we are still in the annotated model grant agreement. And here you have if the electronic time records are computer-based. Let me see if I can. No. If they are computer-based, then we say that the signatures of a computer-based time recording system may be electronic, which means with a password and a username linked to the electronic validation data with a documented and secure process for managing user rights and an auditable log of all electronic transactions. So you need a username, you need a password, you need to have traceability about who changed what, who can encode the hours, who can verify the hours, who can give access rights. I would say that nearly any standard real electronic time recording system available in the market, surely most of those that you can develop already fulfill the conditions, but they are reflected here. And before switching off, because we will have this question sooner or later, for those of you that do not use normally time records, that they don't have timesheets, because this is particularly if we are speaking about SMEs, it's relatively unusual that you do use timesheets. So for those of you that don't have timesheets, the annotated grant agreement via this link will offer you a template, hyper simple, it cannot be simpler, of the minimum of a timesheet with the minimum requirements acceptable for Horizon 2020. So if you don't have anything else, if you don't have a user practice, if you have doubts, well, I'm not sure I want to do something specific but just for the grant agreements of the EU, you can use this template, which is offered via this link in the annotated model grant agreement. And I think I stop there.
Oh, thank you very much, David. I see that I receive a suggestion in the chat saying that we might stop here for a few minutes to give all of you the possibility to vote on the questions of others, because there are quite a few already, so you need some time to go through the list or to ask other questions. So I will now make a, let's say, 3 minutes short break, and you can go to Slido and take a bit of time to vote on your favorite questions. So I will be back in 3 minutes, and maybe I share my screen with, again, the access possibilities to Slido. Okay, see you back in 3 minutes. Okay, then Olivier, can you bring up again the Slido questions? Okay, and we continue with the next one in the row. How specific does the information in the time records need to be? I think it was partially replied because David referred to this minimum timesheet template that we have that is available and accessible through our annotated model grant agreement. But maybe, David, you can again specify what actually is needed.
Well, perhaps what I can actually do is to go back to the share screen, if you don't mind, for another second. Because I'm not even changing places. It's the same section in the annotated model grant agreement, and you see here what the time records should include. If in case that you already have your own time records, and if you don't have it, you don't need to move to our suggested template, which is for those who have nothing, let's so to say. So the time records must include the title and number of the grant agreement, of the action, the beneficiary's full name to know that these are your time records and not someone else. The name, the full name, date, and signature of the person, of the worker. Obviously, the number of hours that the person worked during that period, otherwise it would be useless. The supervisor, so the person who countersigns, if you want, these time records with the full name and signatures, and then a reference to the action task or the work package of Annex 1 to which the person has contributed during these hours. Only that. And this minimum condition once per month. That's all. So as you see, in reality, the information required is very limited. The only thing that perhaps, well, fulfill these conditions. And of course, as I always say, be careful, be honest, be realist. I mean, don't encode hours when the person is supposed to be on holidays. And I know that many researchers will say, yes, but I work during my holidays. That's perfectly fine, but then you work for free. So if you work for free, you don't charge the hours to the grant either, you see? So it's about declaring the reality, but in itself, the conditions of reporting, as you can see, they are extremely basic, and I insist they are reflected there in the annotated model grant agreement. I stop share, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And again, you can also have a look at the template, which reflects exactly these minimum conditions, and then it becomes possibly even clearer. Okay, the next question is exactly linked to what David just mentioned already. Are vacation days and sick leave days considered as eligible personnel costs? David, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm fine. I insist the idea is that you can only declare to the action the hours that the person actually worked for the action. So I insist, if the person is in vacation, the person shouldn't be working. So if he or she works, it cannot be declared. And if it is in sick leave, even worse, it shouldn't be working. So the hours cannot be declared. This does not mean that we don't contribute to those costs. That we do through the hourly rate. Let me take the most simple example, which is if you use option 2 and you divide the personal cost, the annual personal cost, by the individual annual productive hours. Obviously, in the individual annual productive hours, you don't have the holidays. And in the individual annual productive hours, you may remove the sick leave, which means that the same personal costs are divided by a smaller amount of hours. So by each hour that you work, that the person works in the action, we contribute with that small amount to the cost of the sick leave and the vacations. So the hours cannot be changed, but the grant contributes somehow through the hourly rates.
Yes, that is very important. And to bring this even a step further, if you work 100% on the project, that means 100% of your work time, but of course not during your holidays, 100% of the related personnel costs, even including the amounts that you are paid while you are on holidays are charged to the project. I hope that makes it clear. Next question, what can we do with recently hired personnel if we do not have their personnel costs of the closed financial year? I think this was covered. So we go immediately to the next one. Using 1720 hours when calculating hourly rate, only parental leave may be deducted from hours, even if a person is on sick leave refunded by insurance for 2 months, question mark.
So, first issue, because we didn't explain it in detail. Indeed, in the 1720, remember that I say is 1720 regardless of how much the person works. Even the person works more or works less, is 1720. The only thing that it can be indeed removed, so reducing the 1720 hours, is parental leave. That's a specific provision in the grant agreement. So the grant specifically says for parental leave, maternity leave, parental leave, the time can be removed, nothing else. So if the person is sick for 6 months, sorry, unfortunately, it remains 1720. You cannot change that amount. You remember perhaps that I was saying there is 3 options for the annual productive hours, the 1720, which is the one we recommend because it's the simplest, the individual and the standard. One message that I wanted to give you is that you don't need necessarily to use in all instances the same method for all the people. So even if we recommend so. So you may have for one department, for instance, 1720, and for another department or for engineers 1720, and for employees, other type of employees, the individuals or the standard. The important thing is that you must have the same method applied consistently per groups of staff. So it might be depending on the type of contract, it might be depending on the cost center, if you have different cost centers, it might be depending, I don't know, the groups that you have. What you cannot do is to say, I have this methodology, but for some people I use cherry picking individually something else. Let me put it more clear. What you cannot do is to say, I use 1720, but for those people who have the bothering habit of getting sick, I will use the individual. That's not possible. That's not consistently applied. Because indeed, if 1720 is extremely simple, and I must tell you that in many countries, most of those we deal with, 1720 is even interesting financially for the beneficiaries, you cannot take out from the 1720 those in which is not interesting financially because they are usually sick, for instance, or they are having accidents for a long period. You must use it consistently. And if you're into 1720 and some people or one person, unfortunately, is in long sick leave, I'm afraid it remains 1720. That on the side of the hours. And by the way, on the side of the costs, remember that if the costs of the person are reimbursed by an insurance scheme, the social security, etc., that part of the cost is not eligible. You need to remove it because it's not a real cost for you. Perhaps you paid at some moment in time, but then the social security reimburses it to it. So you need to take in our calculation of the hourly rate, the net value. Voila.
Thank you. Next question. Annual personnel costs can only be estimated. Real costs are known after the payment of the December salary plus bonuses. Should the hourly rate be corrected next year? I think this is a nice question showing a misunderstanding, and I hope we can clarify this misunderstanding, David.
Okay, let me try and let me see if we understood the same. So remember when I was saying, if you use the annual hourly rates, you must do the calculation per full financial year. Per full financial year means when you have all the information that you need to calculate the hourly rates, then you can calculate this hourly rate and use it instead of the one of the last closed financial year. Having the full information that you need, it doesn't mean that your accounts have to be audited. For instance, if you are subject to the obligation of have a statutory audit, well, you don't have to wait until the statutory audit is done. If you have all the information in December or early January, you already can calculate this hourly rate. Okay. We have had some cases, or I have seen some cases in which a beneficiary said, look, even in December 2020, I don't have all the information for year 2020. I am not able to calculate the hourly rate for year 2020 because some information is missing. Okay. If that in that extreme case, I'm afraid you will have to use still the hourly rate of the previous year for this whole year, if until January, February, or March, I don't know, of the other, you don't have the information. Those are very rare cases because I insist, it's not about having the accounts audited, it's about having just the capacity to be able to know all the information that you need to calculate the hourly rate. Now, the hourly rates are not recalculated then later on because you see, unless there has been a mistake in your calculation, if I have to declare cost for 2021 now, I will have to use the hourly rate of 2020. If I have to declare cost for 2021, imagining a reporting period that ends in January 2022, normally I will have all the information for the hourly rate of 2021 because the financial year will be already gone. So I will do my calculation and I will use the hourly rate. There's nothing to adjust later. You see, there's nothing to be corrected. Unless I insist I made a mistake, but if I made a mistake, it's a normal correction because in my accounts I made a mistake. But otherwise, there is no reason why you would have to do systematically corrections in the hourly rates. Either you have the whole information for the financial year and you calculate the hourly rate of that financial year, or you use the hourly rate of the last closed financial year. Over.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Are there any Excel basics for the personnel costs where the possibilities can simply be chosen for instance, the variant with 1720 parental leave, to have it on one page. I think I can start replying this myself. So the simple reply is no, but, and the but is about the personnel cost wizard that we have prepared exactly for this. So if you want guidance and you want to be taken by the hand for having all these calculations and the choice of the different options in a system, we encourage you very much to use the personnel cost wizard. Of course, if you are a big organization and you have a very big participation in a project and there are 100 people involved, this can become a bit tedious because you have to go through this wizard for each and every person. But in particular for smaller participation, let's say you are an SME and you have 2 people working on a project, then we would recommend you very much, when you prepare your financial statements as part of the periodic report for a project, you use the wizard for actually putting in the personnel costs. Anything to add, David or Serban? Sorry, Serban.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
Oh, that's perfect.
Okay, nothing to add. Next one, could you please shortly describe the auditing process for personnel costs? I think that is a very pertinent question. So Sorin, tell us what you will do when you come to the premises of a beneficiary and scrutinize. What do you need?
Yes, so I will start by saying that before going on the spot, we do ask some details. So we will ask from the beneficiaries what we call a breakdown of cost, meaning a detail of how the financial statements, the figures that are in the financial statements sent for the Horizon 2020 action have been calculated. And in these details, we will try to obtain the name of each person participating to the action, its cost, its hourly rate, etc. Basically, to put it simple, the audit cycle for checking the personnel cost would be composed of, first of all, the number of hours. So we'll follow, let's say, the calculation of the personnel cost. Personnel cost would be equal to number of hours multiplied by an hourly rate. The hourly rate is the personnel cost of the person, the total personnel cost divided by the productive hours. The number of hours are coming from the time recording system. So depending on what is your time recording system, meaning timesheets or integrated time recording system, we will ask you to give us the timesheets of those persons. We will check whether the number of hours claimed for the project are indeed those that are also indicated in this justification that we have for the timesheets. If there are differences, then we will adjust the number of hours, obviously. We will also look into the timesheets to see whether the timesheets are reliable, they are in line or reconcile also with the human resources data and so on. We will reconcile them as well with some interviews. And so we'll look first at the number of hours worked on the project. Then we will look at what we call the personnel cost hourly rate, meaning the upper part, the total personnel cost of the person. So we'll try to ask you the pay slips for the year or for the period, but for the year, to see how exactly you calculated what amount of personnel cost you used, and whether this reconciles with the pay slips and with the general accounting data that you have in your accounting, obviously. So to see whether these costs are real, incurred, and so on per person. So I'm talking about the normal actual cost situation, not about average personnel cost situation. So and then we will look, of course, at all the amounts that you put there and try to link them with the supporting documents that we may find behind. Then we will look as well at the productive hours that you used. If it's option 1, that's nothing to check. It's option 1, then it's 1720. If it's option 2 or 3, then there are some conditions indicated in the grant agreement to check. So that's basically overall the main the main description of the audit process. Of course, then we have some specificities, as David mentioned, and it was mentioned earlier as well, on the other situations that we may encounter. But basically, this is the the audit process to audit personnel cost. I think this is clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. Can personnel costs for interns and working students be declared? I haven't found yet any information saying the contrary. David, do you want to explain a bit?
Yeah, yes, I'm glad about the question because it's another of this typical example. I don't show it this time, but it's another of these typical examples in which we have a dedicated section in the annotated grant agreement speaking about the students. So after my explanations, you can check directly in the annotated grant agreement. And if you look for just the word students, you will directly fall into these explanations. So indeed, it's possible. It's possible. Now, there are some conditions. You have seen that we have plenty of conditions. There are some conditions also. First, foremost is that the agreement with the student must be work-oriented, not training-oriented. So if the student is the relation that links the student with the beneficiary is training-oriented, so it's for the formation and the training of the student, then we cannot accept it as working for the action because it's not working, it's learning. Then, of course, it must be legal under your national labor law that this type of agreements allow the student to work. And I will also remark as another relevant condition that the person must have the qualifications necessary to do the work. Because when we speak about students, it's a very wide range of different situations, and of course, if we are speaking about the top excellent research projects in the world, I presume that not necessarily all the students have the qualifications to participate. But in any case, one of the conditions is also that the person must have the necessary qualifications. So I insist for more details, really there is a specific section, Control F, so find the word students in the annotated grant agreement, and there is a small section about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question, in timesheets, how do we cut the time, hour by hour, half day or quarter of day? Again, David, I think.
Today, Horizon 2020, the calculations are per hour. So you need to record hours. That's the short reply. Now, imagine that you do time recording once per week, and you just record 15 hours. It's not about a matter of there is no mandatory obligation to record hours, minutes, and seconds per day. Yeah? So a global amount, for instance, is enough. I insist they must be at least recorded and signed once per month, but you need to do it in hours because you have seen that the whole calculation of the personnel cost, I insist, in Horizon 2020 is going to be different in Horizon Europe, but in Horizon 2020 it's based on hours. So you need to record hours. Thanks.
Okay, next one again on the timesheets. Do they have to be signed every month, or is it sufficient if they are signed at the end of the reporting period? Here, the clear reply is every month. Signed by the worker, so to say, and countersigned by the supervisor. Am I correct, colleagues?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, certainly.
Thanks. Next one. H2020 uses a 1720 hourly rate. Horizon Europe uses a daily rate with 1 day is equal to 8 hours. Is the difference as simple as dividing number of hours by 8, or did I miss something? So here we now leave even the purpose of our meeting today, because we wanted to focus on Horizon 2020, but as the question is there and many votes, we have probably to reply. David, can you give it a try?
Yes, yes, but please, particularly for those of you that are not yet in Horizon Europe and perhaps they don't have yet Horizon Europe in their mind, don't be confused about this. Okay, so I will be relatively short. So Horizon 2020, as I have said, is completely personal cost calculation is completely based on hours. Horizon 2020, the calculation will be moved into days. are reasons, of course. One is the corporate approach. So all the grant agreements of the union will be, well, most of the grant agreements of the union will be based on days. So we are moving from hours into days. I insist that what happens in Horizon Europe, you cannot apply in Horizon 2020. Yeah? Remember this. So don't mix both things. So for the person who made the question, yes, there is a very important parallelism between the three options in Horizon 2020, so the 1720 individual and standard, and three possibilities of conversion of hours into days for Horizon Europe. So it's not just this divided by 8, which you are completely right. The other options are also somehow translated into Horizon Europe. But the big difference there is that in Horizon Europe, you will sign, or beneficiaries will have the possibility simply to sign a declaration once per month saying the number of days that the person worked in the action in that month. So all this conversion of hours into days plays a role only for those who normally use time records, who your usual practice is to have timesheets. If that's not your case, you don't need to care about those conversion rates, because at the end of the month, you will simply certify the number of days that the person worked in the action in that month. And I think I stop there because...
Yes, maybe we stop here and we refer to other dedicated webinars that we have to explain the Horizon Europe rules. And we had actually a big webinar on the 24th of March, where in the second part of the day, we explained the details of the model grant agreement for Horizon Europe, including the personnel cost accounting. And if you are really interested already in the Horizon Europe personnel cost accounting, the record of this video, of this webinar, is also available. And you can, for instance, find it by going through the news section of on the funding and tenders portal, which guides you through to the respective website of that event of the 24th of March. Okay, let's now go back to H2020. Next question, please post the wizard link on the personnel expenses, please. So we cannot post a link because this wizard is deeply integrated with the grant management system and with the reporting, with the periodic reporting. But what we can show again, hopefully, David, is the slide where in the reporting system, you see how to access this wizard. David, can you try to quickly bring up this slide again?
Yes, I'm gonna try. Okay. It's coming.
Yes, indeed. So this is the screen in the grant management tool, which you have to access when you prepare your financial statements. And then you can either put in the total personnel costs by hand, or you click on this magic wand, which guides you to the wizard. And then you will be guided for each and every person. That's the way to access it. There is no playground. We cannot make it available outside the system because it's so deeply integrated. Okay. Going to the next one. Can we include to the total annual personnel cost of an employee also private health insurance and private pension fund payments? David?
Yes, I will reply, and I'm sorry if you have something to complement, don't hesitate later on. So the general answer is yes, in the sense that for as far as this is fixed in the employment contract of the person, or because I understand that it's not mandatory by law, looking at the question, but let's imagine it derives from the collective bargaining agreement, for instance, that the workers will have this complementary health insurance or the pension, or if it comes into the grant agreement, yes, then you can include them. There is only one small reservation when this is not explicitly said or either in the collective labor agreement or in the employment contract, but it's something that it's a common practice in the company, well, then you need to be careful that this common practice is really a common practice that applies to everyone, that is not a arbitrary privilege for some people, if you see what I mean, because then it could be in the extreme cases be considered as an arbitrary bonus or benefit and could be declared ineligible. But you see that I'm really in the extreme case because I presume that if you speak about a private health insurance or a private pension fund, most likely at least it comes from the contract of the person. Sorin, do you want to add something?
I think that's very clear. Thank you, David.
Okay, then we go to the next question. Can someone work more than 1,720 hours in a year? Of course, but I guess the question here is can more than 1,720 hours per year charged to a Horizon 2020 project?
Yes, I was remembering now when life was different and these events were presential and we see each other. I was with one of our auditors. It was not Sorin, it was someone else. And somebody in the public asked, how many hours can a person work in a day? And the auditor say, well, 24, of course. So yes, of course, the person can work more than 17-20 hours in a year. That's not a problem. The thing is that if you calculate the hourly rate of this person by dividing the personal cost by 1720, you cannot charge more than 17-20 hours in the year, even if the person actually worked more hours than 17-20, and even if the person actually worked more than 17-20 hours in the specific action. I insist, the reason is that the moment that you charge 17-20 hours, you already charge the whole salary of the person of the whole year to the action. So you cannot charge more because we reimburse cost. So the 100% of the cost of the person has already been charged, you see? So you stop at 17-20 because at that moment you already are declaring 100% of the yearly cost of that person to the action. Now the person can work as much as she or he can or will or want. Thank you.
Okay, that's rather clear, I think. Next question on SME owners. Can you clarify the modalities for SME owners working on the project without salary? Do they receive remuneration or do they contribute to the 30% co-funding? David.
So what happens with SME owners without a salary? They are entitled to declare their hours worked in the action using the SME owner unit cost, irrespectively if later on they get the money or not. So this is what we call a unit cost. We pay a fixed hourly rate, which is paid only on condition that the hours are actually worked by the SME owner. So if I am the SME owner and I worked 10 hours over the year, I don't have a salary and I work these 10 hours over the year, I may declare the 10 hours to the action and I will get the funding corresponding to this 10 hours in accordance to the SME owner unit cost. If you can verify in the annotated agreement, I think it's something in the order of 34 euros per hour multiplied by the country correction coefficient, depending on where the benefice is established, there is an adjustment for the cost of living. So the grant will contribute on the basis of this SME owner unit cost. And as it is a unit cost, a general unit cost, later on the SME owner can get or not get that money or get it through whatever means the person can agree with the company. But we will pay the EU funding corresponding to that unit cost. I hope it's clear.
Maybe to add up, I think there is a second aspect to this question related to the 30%, and I guess the question relates to an innovation action where indeed the reimbursement rate for private organizations is 70%. So what in this case really actually will happen is that if you are an SME owner without a salary, your costs are calculated in the way that David just described, meaning you have a number of hours that you worked on that project. You multiply that number of hours with the predefined unit cost per hour that is available and predefined by the Commission. And then this multiplication gives you, in a certain sense, a proxy for your costs. And then there is still the next step to define the reimbursement. And for doing this, you have indeed to apply the reimbursement rate of 70%. And then you get what the EU contribution for this particular part of the project will be. Okay, next question. How do we do with personnel which is invoicing to the company, not direct employees? This indeed opens a new dimension which we haven't yet discussed in detail. So it's about all these people that are not employees but are consultants working in the premises or not working in the premises, and so on and so forth. So David, you take this question as the occasion to explain all this, please.
I will try to give the short version or the simplest version. So most likely here we are referring to these cases, as I was saying during the presentation, that typically are called consultants. So persons who work for us, but which are not our employees. There is another service contract, so an employment contract through which the person does the work and gets a payment for it. There are three basic situations. Okay, the one is that this cost might still be declared as your personal cost. The conditions, and I'm going to take the two most important conditions. The conditions for you to be able to declare these persons who are not your employees but work for you with other contracts under personal cost are that first, you must have a contract between your company and the person, not another company, the person as a natural person, so at an individual level. If it is with another company, it cannot be personal cost. I will tell you later what happens. So first condition, it must, I insist, I'm picking up the most relevant conditions. First condition, the contract must be direct between the company, so the beneficiary, and the individual natural person. And the second key condition is that the person must work under conditions similar to those of an employee. So similar to your employees. Okay, I'm gonna take the extreme example. If you have one of these consultants who never goes to your premises, who always teleworks, so to say, and you don't have the same possibility offered to your employees, this person most likely cannot be declared as personal cost because you are not treating this person in a way similar to your employees. There might be other examples, but this is really the one that sometimes creates problems. The typical case in which, okay, the consultant works similarly to an employee. Okay, when does she come to the office? I never works from home. And the other employees, they must be here all the time, except for the COVID. They must be here all the time. Well, then you are not treating the person in the same or similar manner than your employees. And then the person could not be declared as personal cost. So you see, the first possibility is under personal cost, subject to conditions. These two are the key ones. There are another two, but much less tricky, I would say, much less controversial. If these conditions are not fulfilled, then you still may declare the cost of the persons, but not under personal cost. They can be declared either as subcontracting, if the person is directly carrying out tasks defined as action task in Annex 1. So if you are supposed to do, I don't know, a report on a study on the vaccine of the COVID, and this work is gonna be done by this consultant, you will have to declare this as subcontracting. Or you can declare them as a purchase of services, with advantage that you can still charge the indirect cost. If the person does not do directly the work on the action, but helps to your company to do the work in the action. And a typical example of those are interim agencies. in which you hire people to work for you through another company. That would be a typical case of purchase of services. And there might be other cases for seconded staff, but I don't think that the question goes into that detail. So in principle, I'm gonna stop there with that explanation.
Okay, we go to the next question. What is the difference between direct personnel costs declared as actual costs and direct personnel costs declared as unit costs or average costs? David, please.
I don't know if Sorin wants to take this one, because it's also something that maybe confronted.
Good.
I can take this one, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Please.
yes. So the actual, the so-called actual costs, or direct personnel costs declared as actual cost, are those costs that are calculated per each individual person. So basically, the upper part of the equation in the calculation of the hourly rate is individual. As long as the average cost, the so-called average cost or direct personnel cost declared as unit cost, are basically average cost. So the hourly rates are calculated not at the level of each individual person, but at the level of either cost category, either category of personnel, for example, engineers, technicians, they have different hourly rates. For example, at the level of the cost centers as well, of the departments of the company. So the hourly rates are calculated not at the level of the individual person, but at the level of cost categories, what we sell categories of personnel, yeah, or cost centers or other more aggregated granularity. So that's the main difference between both. And the rules, the LGBT rules, are different as well.
Yes, thank you. We should maybe add that this average cost model, the unit costs, usually apply in big organizations. And you can only apply this if this is your usual accounting practice. So if indeed in a big organization, you do your personnel cost accounting normally in this way, and then we also accept it for us. In all other cases, and for instance, for SMEs or also for universities, this normally does not apply. And then the only option you have is declaring the actual cost for each individual person. Okay, I go to the next question. What is the frequency required for timesheet signature? I think we replied this. I can only repeat again: monthly, 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 and not per year. Next one. What if someone got a promotion during the project? How to declare the hours? So I guess it's about the hourly rate that increases then with this promotion. David?
Yes, the hours you declare the same. The number of hours doesn't change even if I'm paid more. Now, indeed, regarding the hourly rate is what I tried to explain with the two possibilities of the hourly rates, so the annual hourly rates or the monthly hourly rates. If you are into the annual hourly rates, I insist you will only see this promotion reflected in the hourly rate when you can calculate the hourly rate for the full financial year. So in my example, if I'm promoted today and I get a higher remuneration from 1st of April 2021, but my reporting period ends in June 2021, I will still have to use the hourly rate of 2020 for the hours that I worked from January until June, because my financial year 2021 is ongoing, it's not complete, so I cannot calculate an hourly rate 2021, you see? So it's only gonna be for the second half of the year, for the next reporting period, when I will be able to calculate a new hourly rate that I will see this promotion reflected, and my new hourly rate from July until December will be higher than the one that I used from January to July, because from January to July I used 2020, and from July to December I used the new one for 2021. I insist we know in some cases because of the usual practices of the beneficiaries, and in some other cases because beneficiaries perceived that they would be better served if they move it into the monthly hourly rates. Then if you do it per month, obviously from the month in which the promotion takes place, from the next month, you already will have a new hourly rates, because each month you will calculate an hourly rate with the monthly personal cost. So there, the promotion is immediately reflected. There is not this backlog concerning the annual hourly rate. But I insist, if I may, we did our own calculations at the beginning of Horizon 2020, and the increased contribution that you could get by the monthly hourly rate is in the order of 1%, even less. And the downside of the monthly calculation is that the administrative burden is every single month. And even if we didn't get into the details, there are specific rules regarding how to calculate the monthly hourly rates that do not apply to the annual, which on top of the administrative burden increases the risk of error. So it's your choice, it's open. We are not telling that you must take the annual hourly rates. You may perfectly take the monthly. Just be aware that there is an increased risk of error and much more administrative work. Voila.
Okay, thank you. Next question, can the staff member sign the timesheets with an electronic signature? I think we covered this in principle. So the basic answer is yes, but there are some conditions to this electronic system that you have to fulfill, and the conditions can be found in the AGA. We have shown the place, the annotated grant agreement. But maybe there is another aspect to this question that we have not tackled yet, indeed, and possibly it refers to the special COVID situation where many people are on telework. And actually, if you have a paper-based timesheet system where normally you and your supervisor sign on paper, what do you do now during the COVID situation? And indeed, we have provided a reply to this question in our frequently asked questions on the Funding and Tenders portal. And I don't know, David, you are always very quick in bringing up all these things. If you can refer to that frequently asked question.
To show it on the screen.
Or if you know it by heart, you can explain it orally.
See, I know it by heart, but it was perhaps, give me just, put the background music.
Okay, so maybe I start replying. So in such cases where you are indeed on telework due to COVID, you can sign the timesheet monthly yourself at home. You scan it, you send it by email to your supervisor. He prints it out, or she, and signs it. And then you keep it for the case that there will be an audit. But again, this is described in one of our FAQs. And by the way, there is a whole list of FAQs related to specific flexibility in the COVID situation. And you can find them on our FAQ database on the portal when searching for COVID or for Corona.
Well, I was just sharing the list of FAQs. And by the way, if you have, to be frank, I normally use Google or other tools, and if you type Horizon 2020 COVID FAQs, you get directly to this list, in which indeed one of the questions explained is this about the time records, which is frankly exactly as Peter explained. So I will not insist on that.
Even myself, I know it by heart by now. Okay. Thank you very much.
Maybe just to mention that this link to the FAQs is also on the event page.
Very good. Thanks, Olivier. Okay, let's go to the next question. We still have a few minutes left. As the beneficiary of a grant, can I pay an in-house consultant from a different country of mine? For instance, beneficiary from Poland, consultant based in France. David or Sorin, who wants to take this one?
I'm gonna do an introduction and then Sorin can confirm. you see when you read the question that there is something odd with in-house in a different country, because so presumably it's in his or her house. It's certainly not in the house of the beneficiary, which it's always a bit curious when I read this. It's an in-house consultant, but it's in the US. Well, it's difficult to say that it's an in-house consultant. Well, at least we don't have the same idea of what is an in-house consultant. Now, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. First, remember what I explained a few minutes ago about the consultants. If let's take the example that the consultant is in another country. If in your company your employees can work from another country, well, and you are able to keep trace in a reliable manner of how many hours, because remember that we pay per hour, how many hours the person worked. Fine, you can still declare this consultant as your personal cost, as your other employees, because you will be treating also the consultant in a similar way to your employees. If it is not the case, as I said before, it doesn't mean that the costs are ineligible, but they will have to go either under purchase of services or subcontracting. It's not a rule, but in most cases in which we see this how can I say, far away provision of services, it's often the case of, or it can generally qualify as subcontracting, because in most cases there is really a part of the work that is charged to be done separately from the rest. This is not a rule. There are cases in which the work of the person can be perfectly integrated in the normal work of the company and not work autonomously. But in many cases, it could qualify as subcontracting. So you really need to see, it's possible, you really need to see how this situation of this in his or her house consultant is compared with your employees, to see if you can declare the person as under personal cost, or if it is not the case, if the type of work that the person carries out fits into subcontracting or fits into purchase of services. I don't know, sorry, if you want to add something.
I think it was very clear, David. Thank you. I would just add something, maybe if I can link to a previous question on the audit, an explanation of the audit that we do on personal cost. Maybe to mention also that the indicative audit program for Horizon 2020 is also published. So for those beneficiaries that would like to be in our shoes and to have a look at their own financial statement and to detect eventually errors, they can already go through the audit program and find the checks that are done usually by the auditors. Thank you.
Okay, next questions. Do employees working in 2 or more H2020 projects have to fill in one timesheet for each project or one timesheet for all their activities? Again, David, I assume.
Look, the rule first and foremost is that you only have to record hours worked in the Horizon 2020 actions. So the rest of your activities, internal projects or whatever you do and beyond, whatever the person does beyond the work in the Horizon 2020 actions, you do not have to record. Now, I guess that perhaps the auditors have a preference. I don't know if Sorin wants to explain later on, but in itself, there is no rule about if they have to put it in one single timesheet or in different timesheets. Strictly speaking, if you have it in one single timesheet, the supervisors, you should take care about who signs as supervisor. If the supervisor is always, I would say, the next hierarchy level, then it's fine. But I have seen organizations in which the supervisor depends on the project, because each project has a project leader, and then depending if the person is working in project X, the supervisor is going to be the project leader of X. If it's in Y, the supervisor will be the project leader of Y, and then you may have some difficulties to ensure that in the time records, perhaps you need the signatures of the two supervisors if they are in different projects, you see. But that's a bit extreme cases. So in general, there are no rules as such about if one timesheet per project or one timesheet covering all the projects together.
Maybe I can add that what we see in practice is that as soon as there are several projects, it's preferable to have one timesheet per person. It simplifies the follow-up and the management on the timesheets. So this is really best practice that we can recommend.
Okay, thank you. Next question, what is the difference between maximum EU contribution and maximum grant amount? David, you want to give it a go?
So the maximum EU contribution is what is automatically calculated on the basis of the cost, of the eligible cost. So it's an arithmetical calculation, okay? Taking into account the cost declared or budgeted, if we are into the budget, multiplied by the funding rate. The maximum grant amount is the maximum amount of money that the Commission or the joint undertaking, the EU funding body, may pay for that grant. It's what is fixed in Article 5. You see, so one is automatical calculation, and the other, the maximum grant amount, is really the maximum that we can pay in that grant, which is not always the maximum EU contribution resulting from the cost.
Okay. Is there a training on the personnel cost wizard? I can reply there is currently no dedicated training, but we have dedicated guidance. And I think we will put the link to this dedicated guidance on the personnel cost wizard also on the event webpage, if in case it's not yet there.
It is already there.
It is already there. So you find this guidance and you can read through it.
And if I may, Peter,
Yes.
if people is worried about getting blocked, we are also getting questions about the use of the wizard and replying to questions about the use of the wizard through the research through the research inquiry service and the IT help desk.
Okay, very good. Next question regarding bonuses. What happens when you have an eligible bonus that is paid 3 months after the end of the reporting period? You lose it.
No, you don't lose it. I have seen also other questions without both somehow related about things that are paid later. Look, as a rule of thumb, so it may depend on the specific case, but as a rule of thumb, you need to take into account the cost the moment that is incurred. So let me put the example of this bonus. I don't enter into if it is eligible or not. The inquirer said it's eligible. I don't know if it is eligible or not. Not all bonuses are eligible. All right. Let's assume it is eligible. Let's imagine that the bonus is generated in December because it's an annual bonus. I don't know, because of the performance assessment. Let's say if my company records the bonus of the person in December and it appears in the payroll of December, even if it is paid in March next year, you will put it into the calculation of the hourly rate of December. So of that year or the monthly hourly rate of December, because it's already recorded in your accounts, even if you will pay it later. If you only record it in your accounts, if it's only accurate at the moment in which it is paid, so in this example, perhaps in March and the year after, you will take it into account for the hourly rate of the year after, or in March of the year after if you are in monthly hourly rates. So it's not lost. It's just a question of in which of the two periods you will take into account this bonus. And it really depends on how do you record that into your accounts, because we need to see that it's recorded in your accounts. So it's for the bonus, but I also seen for retroactive salary increases, it applies a bit the same logic. If I have a retroactive salary increase in February that goes since I don't know September of the previous year, if I still somehow, I don't know very well how, but somehow I'm able and I do record this in the accounts of the previous year, then you take it into account pro rata in the accounts of the previous year, so for the hourly rate of the previous year. And I think it's typically the case, I record it in full in February, even if it concerns partly the previous year, then I systematically will take it into account in the year in which it's recorded, even if part of it was theoretically generated in the previous year. So it really goes into when it appears as recorded in your accounts.
Okay, so we have officially reached the end of our session. It's 4 minutes past 12. Colleagues, I think we could be available still, let's say, for a quarter of an hour to go through a few more questions. Is this okay for you?
Yes.
And
yes.
we also see that many of the participants are patient and still are here. So maybe we go indeed through a few more of the questions. So let's continue for a while. Next question. Due to COVID-19, some companies have gone through a temporary regulation of employment, ERTE. Not sure in which country this is. What can be included as it's Spain, very good. What can be included as personnel costs? Can we deduct these hours? David,
yeah, but the question is rather large, and this is one of these questions in which, with your permission, Peter, we are not going to reply live because there is a written reply to the Spanish national contact points. So for the person who asked it, I either please contact your national contact points. You have seen the list, the link to the list of the national contact points, or contact us directly in the Research Inquiry Service, and we will send you the question with all the details, because here on live, we risk to be misunderstood about the explanations. It's a very specific case in a very specific circumstance, and it's better that you get the full reply. So either by contacting national contact points or send the question to the Research Inquiry Service, and we already have a question, an answer ready.
Okay, very clear reply. Next question. Do you have a monthly breakdown of the 1720 hours per year? I guess this is a question related to when you want to charge per month and not per year.
The answer is that no, the ceiling does not apply per month. So you can work in a month more than 143.33, if I remember right, is the 12. So the verification is at the end of the year. Now, let's imagine that the person just worked 6 months for the company over the year, right? This person cannot charge at the end of the year 1720 hours, because in reality just worked for 6 months. So the maximum number of hours that I could charge at the end of the year will be 860. So the 50% or the equivalent of 6 months for the time that this person worked. So not the full 1720. So the ceiling does not apply per month. You may go beyond 1/12 of 1720, so beyond the 143.33 in a month. That's not a problem. Just you need to verify at the end of the year that you don't go over the annual ceiling, which normally is 1720 if you are under option 1, sorry, or the corresponding pro rata if the person didn't work the full year or if the person worked part-time.
Okay. Next one, if my financial year does not match with the calendar year, how can I calculate the personnel costs? No problem, I would say, but David will explain.
See, no problem. Of course, the calculation, for all the explanations, it's true that and it might be for some of you perhaps confusing, because out of simplicity, we always refer or make equivalent the financial year with the calendar year, because that's something that everyone can understand. By the way, for those that are curious, in the next framework program, in Horizon Europe, we move into calendar year. But in Horizon 2020 is financial year. So what you use is your financial year, not the calendar. If your financial year is from September until August, then your calculations will be from September until August, you see? So it's the financial year what is the reference, not the calendar year. And I apologize if this has been confusing during the explanations, because it's true that the vast majority of beneficiaries have a financial year matching calendar year. And for examples, it's much more simpler to do these examples using the calendar year. But it's not because in Horizon 2020, I insist, not because you must use the calendar year. No. The rule is you use the financial year.
Okay, thanks. Next one, a person is working in 4 work packages and for the past 12 months has dedicated in total 7-point-something person months. Can we calculate the exact number of person months that correspond to each of the 4 work packages? I assume there is a certain confusion between the financial reporting of hours in the financial statements and the justification of the resources employed in the scientific technical report. But David, do you want to explain a bit more?
See, I guess that, remember, there is a big difference, I insist, in Horizon 2020 between the financial report, which is based in hours, generally speaking, there are the exceptions, but the financial report, which is based in hours, and the technical reports, which is based in person months. The one should match somehow with the other, of course, but they are not exactly the same. So when you calculate your personal cost, you deal all the time with hours, and we don't care about how many person months mean these hours for the calculation of the financial part and the EU funding. Now, for your question and trying to go into the declaration in the technical reports where you have to declare person months, I don't know if you remember that in the minimum requirements for the timesheets, we also have the reference that the timesheet should have an indication of the work package or task in which the person was working during the period covered by the timesheet. So through this, and one of the reasons why we asked for that in the timesheet is precisely for you to be able later on to say how many hours converted into person months the person worked in each of the different work packages. So I would say if you have been strictly correct with the timesheets, you should be able through your timesheets to exactly allocate or exactly determine how many of these 7.23 person months correspond to each work package. You will do this through the records in the timesheets. But as I say, it's not exactly the same in the sense that for the financial support, we are very strict and very exact to the hour. For the technical report is more the orientation you see is in person months, which has a certain margin of interpretation, because you can convert the hours into person months in accordance to your usual practices. We have no rule for that. And voila.
Okay. Yet another one. My country's monthly productive hours are over 160, which makes the yearly near 2000. Can I still declare that much productive hours, or should I stay at 1720? I assume there is a, I assume there is a certain misunderstanding between productive hours and workable hours. David?
See, possibly there is, but it doesn't necessarily play a role in the bulk of the answer, because in reality the answer is quite simple. If you and it's repeated of something that we already tackled, if you have calculated the hourly rates by dividing the annual personal cost by 1720, you can never ever charge more than 1720. But I insist, this is because when you charge 1720, you already charge the full salary, the full annual salary of the person to the grant. So if you keep on charging hours, you will be making a profit. The good news for these 11 persons who asked this question, voted for this question, is that this is a very financially very interesting for you if in your country you normally work 2,000 hours. Why? Because the moment that you reach 1720, as I say, you charge the full amount of the salary of this person to the Horizon 2020 actions, and the person still has more than 200 hours to work in the year. I presume that you would not send your employees home saying, well, we already charged all your salary, so now you can rest home even if it is mid-December. So the person keeps on working, and let's imagine that the person goes for another project, no new projects, for national projects, for instance, you could still get some funding for those hours. Or in any case, the person is still productive for you while the costs have been already charged in full to the EU. So this is one of the cases in which the 1720 is financially very interesting for the beneficiaries compared with the other two options for the hourly rates.
Okay, rather clear. Next question, do we have to record timesheets also for our ESRs? And I have to admit, I don't know what ESRs are. Do you? Does anybody know? Maybe in this case, the person having asked can put a remark into the Zoom chat box. Early stage researchers. Okay.
Oh,
this is apparently Marie Skłodowska-Curie or the ERC. Okay.
there is different cases. The Maria Sklodowska-Curie. Remember when we started this morning, we were saying, look, we are going to speak about cost reimbursement, so actual cost reimbursement grants, in which you declare the cost, the actual cost, and you get the EU funding. Maria Sklodowska-Curie grants are based on unit cost. So depending on the person months, the number of months that the person is in the grant, you get the monthly allowances, so to say. In those cases, in the cases of Maria Sklodowska-Curie, as they work with person months, you don't need to keep record of the number of hours, because we pay for the number of months that the person is in the grant, you see. So you will need the contracts, and I don't know if sorry, maybe later on can say what else do they check during an audit in Maria Sklodowska-Curie, but in principle, at least you need the contract of the person and the evidence that the person was hired and working for the grant over X months, and then the Maria Sklodowska-Curie pays the unit cost based on the number of months. In those cases, you don't need it. For the others, if we are into ERC, for ERC, you also need timesheets. It's the same, because they go into the normal cost, actual cost eligibility. So in those, you will need timesheets. Well, I don't think it's necessary to get into the details from Maria Sklodowska-Curie audit. Sorry if you want to say something, but it's not really the bulk of today's presentation.
Indeed, David, thank you. So yeah, the Maria Sklodowska-Curie eligibility rules are a bit different, and eventually the person can also have a look into the indicative audit program that is published to see what we check for those kind of grant agreements. But yeah, the reply would be a bit more elaborated. Thank you.
Okay, I suggest now I take the last question for today, and then we close. When using the monthly calculation method, is it possible to adjust a closed period to take into account retroactive salary increase? David.
Look, this for me is the example of why we do not recommend the monthly calculations. Well, remember that I said that there were specific rules for the monthly calculations. One of these specific rules is that whatever you pay once per year, you need to allocate it pro rata in each month. So if I pay, do you remember the bonus we spoke before? If I pay the bonus in December, I cannot charge the full amount of the bonus in December, but I have to do a pro rata of the amount of the bonus generated in each month. As you may imagine, in many cases, the bonus or this case of salary increases, you don't really know in January how much is going to be in December. And you are not supposed to declare estimations. So potentially you might find yourself indeed in saying, well, until December, I don't put anything there for the bonus or the increase, because I don't know how much it's going to be. But then in December, when I know it, I will readjust retroactively all the 12 calculations of the year. And in some grants, I will have to declare adjustments, and good luck. So yes, you may do it in the sense that when you are calculating the month of January, you don't know how it's going to be the salary increase. But here, I hope that you can see that is not us pushing irreasonably for the annual hourly rates, that the monthly hourly rates, let me put it this way, but for peanuts in number of euros, creates a lot of complications in terms of calculation. And I think that it gives already the idea of what you can do and why we are more tending for the annual calculation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with this, I have to close because we are already beyond the planned timing of the meeting. I would like to thank all of you very much for the active participation, the interesting questions. I repeat again that all the background documents, all the links that we mentioned during this seminar are available on the event webpage. I also encourage you to consult the annotated grant agreement, because many of the things that we explained here today are also available in the annotated grant agreement, and you can search there for particular items by using the search function in PDF documents. So thank you very much again. We will continue this series of webinars. We will invite you and other people to other types of such webinars. And we are also preparing a big series of webinars on Horizon Europe if you're interested in participating in Horizon